So here we go, reviewing a bit before we read. We're on 1 Kings chapter 1. David is currently the king of Israel. He is elderly and he's preparing for death. He is the third king of Israel. Our first king was Judges chapter 9, Abimelech, who was Gideon's son. The second king was Saul in 1 Samuel chapter 9, and that was a response to Israel demanding a king in 1 Samuel chapter 8. David is anointed to be king of Israel in 1 Samuel chapter 16, but he's employed by King Saul as a harp player. In Judges chapter 1, Joshua dies and Israel has no leader. Israel is directly led by God. In chapter 2, an angel tells Israel that they did not keep God's command to destroy surrounding nations, and that was given by God in Numbers chapter 33, verses 55 through 56. After the angel tells Israel that they didn't obey, Israel does nothing to obey after that. So once that generation is gone, the next generation is born, they worship other gods, and God begins appointing judges for leadership. So remember how I said Abimelech is the first king? Gideon was a judge. So Gideon was one of God's appointed leaders. We get here to 1 Samuel chapter 8. That's when Israel wants a king to be like the nations around them. Leviticus 18 could be the answer to the question, why would God command people to completely eradicate another group? Leviticus 18, God tells Israel, the people that lived on this land made the land sick with their behavior, so sick that in Leviticus 19, God tells them when they get there, you can't eat the crops for 5 years. Joshua is a book recording land acquisition. And so when we're looking at leadership, we're going to look at Moses. He's the first leader of Israel. So before Moses, a leader was not needed because right now we're in Kings, we're talking about leaders. Before Moses, there was no nation of Israel. And so there were no additional laws really after Genesis 9, because Genesis chapter 2 and Genesis chapter 9 were dietary restrictions. There really were no laws given. I have Genesis 25 here because this is my favorite example of someone going to God directly because they have an issue and they want an answer. Rebecca had a difficult pregnancy. She went to God and God answered her in the next verse. So this is how people were being led before Moses. In Exodus 12, Moses leads Israel out of Egypt. The book of Exodus is 40 chapters. So we don't see Moses really embody that role of leadership until they get into the wilderness and everyone is looking at him for answers. So Moses is the leader from Exodus 13 to 40. Then we get the book of Leviticus and the book of Numbers. Those are all occurring under Moses' leadership. When we get to Deuteronomy, this is the audience of the book of Deuteronomy is the second generation of Israel out of Egypt. So the first generation of Israel were slaves and they crossed the Red Sea. Well, we're going to go over that information again, but in the book of Numbers, God tries to get them to go into a land. They didn't have the right attitude. So God said, you'll stay out here 40 years until the next generation. Well, by the time we get to Numbers chapter 26, that 40 years has passed. We have a whole new generation of people ready to go into Canaan under Joshua's leadership. So this is the audience in the book of Deuteronomy, and Moses is giving his farewell address, communicating his last information to them before he has to go on the mountain and die, and Joshua takes over his leadership. I get critical of Moses because he gives intentionally misleading information to Israel, and because of the audience being so young and they don't have these experiences that their parents had of seeing those miracles in Egypt, it would be really important for Moses to be as honest with them as possible. And he isn't. In Numbers chapter 20, this is when Moses disobeys God, and it's such an event that God says, you're not going to be the leader of them anymore. You're not going to take them into Canaan. And what happened there, God told Moses to speak to a rock. Instead, he hit it. And God said, that's the last time. You're not going to be a leader anymore. God tells him clearly, that's why. We get to Numbers 27. God tells Moses a second time, this is why you won't go into Canaan because of what you did in Numbers chapter 20. Even at the end of his life in Deuteronomy 32, God tells him again, this is why you won't go to Canaan because of what you did in Numbers 20. When we look at Deuteronomy chapter 3, verse 26, and Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 21, Moses lies outright to Israel. He says in both of these occasions, God will not let him continue his leadership for their sakes. This is completely untrue. Completely untrue. In Numbers chapter 20, Moses disobeyed God, and that's when God said, okay, you're not going into Canaan. Then in Numbers chapter 14, that's when Israel disobeyed God and said, those people won't go into Canaan either. It's going to be 40 years until the next generation. So the only people that were able to go from Numbers 14 were Joshua and Caleb. So for Moses to say that, it's just an outright lie. Okay? And just again, Numbers 26, that's 40 years later. This new generation did not sin against God yet by the time we get to Deuteronomy. When I read Numbers chapter 20, I thought to myself that it was pretty dramatic that God would remove a man from leadership for one offense. But that is not the case. We have to remember, Moses is the one writing these events. So we have to read through what the information he presented to us to figure out why God might have had a problem with him being a leader in Canaan. When we review Moses' behavior from Exodus 2 onward, we can conclude that Moses has an issue acting without God and giving misleading information as a leader. In Exodus chapter 2, there is a discrepancy, or not discrepancy, there is a disagreement with a Hebrew and an Egyptian. Moses doesn't know what's going on. Okay, he asks no questions. He didn't even ask God what he should do. He just jumps in and murders the Egyptian. So, acting without God, we get to Exodus chapter 24. The Israelites are in the wilderness. Moses decides that it's a good idea to sprinkle people with blood. So, this might not be a big deal, but in my opinion, this is, because this is just like a pastor asking his congregation to do extra things just because he can, because he's a leader. And that's basically what's happening here, sprinkling people with blood. God did not tell him to do this, but it seems like people will just accept certain things if it's coming from a leader. We get to Exodus 32, 26 through 30. This is after Moses has gone up in the mountains and the incident with the golden calf, right? So Moses comes down, he burns the calf, he throws the ashes in a body of water. He has Israel drink the ashes, and then he says, who is on the Lord's side? Gather up here to me. And the children of Levi, that's one of 12 tribes of Israel, they gather together and they kill each other. Moses tells them to kill each other. And so 3,000 of them die. Further on in the Bible, when we get to Numbers chapter 3, the Levites become this special class, and they're the least number in all the tribes. And we just have to remember these events are being dictated by a man who wrote to us and told us that he also lied to some other people. So we have to trust him and trust these events. Okay? So after he tells them to kill each other, now they're the least in number, and now those are the priests, that's the holy people. Just something to pay attention to. Numbers chapter 20 is Moses' last disobedience with the water. God tells him to speak to the rock. He hits it, and that's when God says, that's it. I have to cut my loss. I had to say that's it. Okay? Numbers 33. God instructs Israel to destroy everything when they get to this new land. Don't make any agreements. But in Deuteronomy 20, Moses tells them you can make agreements with some of them. So when we talk about Israel being disobedient, you have to also remember they had a leader like this who had this problem. Deuteronomy 24 is another example of Moses communicating misleading information. At this time, the priests were also medical advisors. So he is admonishing them, the Israelites, when you go into the new land of Canaan, make sure you adhere the advice of the priests so that you avoid leprosy. And he says, remember what God did to Miriam. And this is misleading because in Numbers chapter 12, there's not enough evidence to suggest she was struck leprous because she did not adhere the advice of Aaron. So in Numbers 12, the chapter starts out telling us that her and her brother Aaron, the priest, were speaking against Moses because he married a woman of a different ethnicity. Moses is an Israelite and this woman was an Ethiopian. Afterwards, she was struck leprous. And in my opinion, it's not 100% clear if that is what caused her to be struck leprous, but she had leprosy after that. And so, because that isn't very clear, and it wasn't that she didn't adhere to the priest because she was talking to the priest, this is misleading information. The reason why I have Deuteronomy 34 up here is because even though Moses died at 120 years old, the Bible says none of his natural forces were abated, meaning he did not, his mind was still good, his memory was still good. It wasn't like that was a problem. He was still healthy. So for him to die and be telling all these miscommunication and just straight up lying to these people, this is who Moses was. So now we have that. A question that I had as I was reading: why did God allow that misinformation to be spread? Why not expose him? Okay. Now, traditionally, I've always been taught that God has manifested and been referred to as a dove or as a lamb, both very gentle animals who are not forceful. So, the pattern that I see is instead of exposing and correcting the past, God simply wants to give directions for the future. But what we see God doing is waiting until he's asked for something, waiting until someone wants to pursue him for his advice. Okay? My favorite example, Genesis 25 with Rebecca. She was having a difficult pregnancy. She went to God and asked why. The next verse, God answered her, right? Judges chapter 1. After Moses and Joshua die, Israel has settled into this new land. They have no leader. They go to God directly, and God answers them directly. For whatever reason, they get away from that system of talking to God directly, and we don't see them ask God directly for anything again until like Judges chapter 20. So, uh, after Joshua dies, the secondary leadership of having judges to lead them is who God appointed as a style of leadership, and these people were direct connections to God. This slide is my opinion. Okay, I just wanted to be clear. The Bible does not say this. I'm saying this based on what I have seen people do and based on what I've read in the Bible. This Bible is more about human nature and documenting human behavior, and God isn't even speaking that much in the Bible so far. In addition to people not wanting a genuine relationship with God beyond what they can get out of Him, and again, God is the creator of all, so He knows if you only want to be around Him for what you can get or not. In addition to that, I believe that most people don't want to be contacted by God directly and that they do not have the temperament to handle that type of relationship. Because of that, and because people don't want to go to God directly, this is how we end up having leadership at all when it comes to God. Because all a leader is, so far, is the middleman between the human being and God. It is not needed, but if people fail to have the right attitude, you may need to have a leader. Okay? So, uh, when we look here in Exodus 19, God tells Israel that he will manifest to them, but he gives them conditions. He says you're going to have to, avoid sex for a while. You're going to have to clean up. You can't get too close. And then when we look at Exodus 16 and Exodus 19, God manifests through forces of nature. So it is my theory that the reason why God says things like, you can't get too close. Again, it's my theory because I don't have specific evidence to prove this, and God did not say this. But from what I've seen God manifesting through nature, the reason why he needs people to have the correct disposition is maybe because his energy is so pure that sensing any incorrect energy will affect him. And I know that I've found myself having to uh, change my social media and different things like that and just get away from social media simply because some of the energy that I encounter on there. And I personally believe this is the same thing with God. It's just because God is so sensitive to us and knows each one of us, any amount of incorrect energy may mess with his energy. I don't know. I just see God so differently now that I started reading and paying attention to how he manifests through nature. Okay. My theory. But when we get to Exodus 19, verse 16, and God begins to manifest himself, the entire Israelite camp trembled. They were terrified of God's communication style. So when we wonder how come God doesn't just expose them, think about it. If God were to just start talking, disembodied voice, maybe he doesn't have a body the way that we have. Maybe he is just an entity and he just starts screaming or he just starts talking, you know? Maybe his talking voice sounds like a scream to us and he just started talking over Moses. I mean, that would probably terrify these people. So lastly, I just want to, I didn't put it in the slide, but I just want to give you some more evidence of why I believe most people do not want this type of relationship with God, all right? When we look at Genesis 7 through 9, this is the flood. God could only save 8 people. Okay, the next time we have Sodom and Gomorrah in Genesis 19. God could only save 3 people. And those 3 people, with Lot and his 2 daughters, they ended up producing inbred offspring because they both had sex with their father. All right. Then we get to Numbers 26. God could only save Joshua and Caleb. He couldn't even save Moses, the prophet. So this is my reasoning. I hope to see you in the next video. I love you. Have a wonderful day.